When Assemblymember Cedillo won a seat representing the 46th district in the California State Assembly in a special election in 1998, he committed himself to championing the working poor. He was elected to the State Senate in 2002 and recently elected to the 45th district in 2010. He has found a balance with his underlying message that progressive politics is good for business. This logic of what is good for the people is good for business is what has allowed him to have a working class tilt without antagonizing the business class. He understands that unless there is a net creation of wealth, there will not be much to share. And sharing, he does. His Cedillo Alarcón bill pumped $50 million into infrastructure funds for community clinics serving the uninsured, low-income, mostly undocumented patients. I know. And he apparently has just achieved yet another remarkable legislative victory. That Governor Brown just signed a bill that you authored, and I'm not going to steal your thunder. I'm going to let you talk about that exciting development. But he has authored close to 100 bills that have been signed into California law by 4 different governors, so he's clearly outlasted the top spot. Pete Wilson, Gray Davis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Jerry Brown. And most of these were groundbreaking pieces of legislation that covered California's brownfields, state oversight and fair share zoning for city transitional and emergency homeless shelters, workers' right to organize, downtown rebound, and more recently, the groundbreaking California DREAM Act, which we were just hearing about. And I should add, by the way, that Marco Firebaugh, who was mentioned as the author of AB 540, was a UCLA law graduate, mentored by none other than Professor Laura Gomez. Cedillo's advocacy on behalf of marginalized communities is legendary. He has become the voice for society's least, last, and lost. His causes have ranged from becoming a formidable counterweight to Proposition 187 and Pete Wilson's inhumane crusade against undocumented families, up to his unwavering support for Filipino-American World War II veterans, the uninsured, low-income families, the homeless, and most recently, AB 540 for the Dreamers. He was also crucial in the establishment of the Korean American Museum and Chinese American Museum in Los Angeles. He is determined to mainstream all the marginalized agendas that we know are out there, and we heard about some of them today, and he's going to do it one community at a time. First elected 13 years ago in the Assembly, Cedillo has remained first and foremost a public servant. He contends that the immigrant agenda is an American agenda. Until we successfully integrate all, including those who unjustly remain in the shadows of mainstream society, America will never live up to its promise and its history. Gil Cedillo represents a new leadership that places commitment before ambition, community before self, and people before politics. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank each and every one of you for being here. It's Friday afternoon. It's 4:30. You've got a lot of other options and a lot of other choices in this great city. And so I thank you for being here this afternoon. Let me thank the Dean for that gracious introduction. I won't let you know that we're cousins, just kidding. But thank you for that gracious introduction. I'm very flattered and somewhat overwhelmed by the opportunity to be here with you today. If you would have told me 43 years ago, when I first stepped on this campus as a 15-year-old upper bound student, that someday I would come back and speak at this prestigious faculty center, be introduced by the dean of the law school, I probably would have thought that you were on one of the popular drugs at the time period. And so I'm very flattered to be here. I thank you, Dean. I thank the faculty, especially thank you, Dr.
Noriega?
No. Dr. Otto. I almost called you Dr. Lada. Dr. Otto. Dr. Lada was here when we got here. Dr. Otto, thank you for your patience, your tolerance of a young machista who worked with you in the summer, who would come and say outlandish things to you about what the center should be doing for the community, because I was a young student at the time and not quite.
Remember?
I do remember. I'm apologizing now, okay? I'm apologizing now because it plays a central role in what I'm saying is that, you know, all these things are part of history. And so one of the first things I want to say is that history matters. And so what we're doing today, and as we talk about this struggle, it's important for us to have this historical perspective, personally and as a community and in a broader context of the world, so that we understand how we get here. Someone said that the question I'm supposed to address is about what we can teach Congress or the legislature, the federal government, with respect to these accomplishments. I take no presumption on that and will not address that. But what I will say is that history does matter, and so for me to be here today with you is simply a continuation of a personal history, and it's one like many of the students, in fact probably like everybody here. I just left Senator Dick Durbin at a press conference in downtown Los Angeles, and he told the history of his mother and how she was brought here at 4 years old, and she's an immigrant, and she became a citizen later in life, and behind his desk is that certificate of citizenship that she received. We all have that story. That story is what the American project is about. That story is what the idea and the concept of what America is all about. And so we all have that individual one. There's an incredible, let me do a plug for a friend of mine right now. There's an incredible movie right now called Harvest of Empire. It's a movie based on a book by Juan Gonzalez, reporter, news journalist, co-host of Democracy Now! That's a nice plug for him. But it tells the story, right, of the movement, the diasporas of people, Latinos who come here, and what are the forces that bring us. And then you just break that down into each of us have that individual story. You know, I grew up here, I'm a third, 3.5, I don't know, something like that, generation, Mexican-American, born in Barstow, California, grew up in Los Angeles. We were already living in LA. I have no idea why my mother decided to drive back to Barstow so I could be born there. I said, you know, Ma, Soto, the General Hospital, I could have just been like everybody else. But she did. And when Mexicans ask me, because they know our work, they'll ask me, well, where are you from Mexico? I don't know. So I always say, well, where's the poorest people from? You know, and they'll say someplace, and I'll say, we must have been from there. Because for us, we traveled north and then followed the train route, and we stopped in Barstow because we thought that was like the Mecca. And literally, when our eldest uncle passed away, it said that, right? We were looking for work. We worked in Coachella Valley, we worked in Yuma, Arizona, we worked out mining, farming, and with the train, with the Santa Fe Railroad. And so those are the kind of preparations that I had for my journey and for my story. Fortunately, my dad, 13-year-old, grew up on his own, took off with his friend from Barstow to Los Angeles. He grew up in the kind of Temple Beaudry area, went to junior high school on his own, high school, worked at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, worked at the Groms, he worked in a factory as 14 years old. And fortunately, he joined the Army. You know, this is like a real Chicano story. Joined the Army, went to the South, had a big influence on him, and came back, always going to Barstow to visit his cousins and his family, and met my mom and brought her to Los Angeles, thank God. Right? Because Barstow's hot and dusty. and not a lot to do. And so they came to Los Angeles, and I grew up in Los Angeles, and was right at that edge of that Chicano movement, that burst. And I went to the great Roosevelt High School. But I came from a working class family. We weren't political, we weren't politicized. My parents didn't speak, we were politicized in the sense that my parents didn't speak Spanish to us because they had had so much trouble growing up. Segregated pools, segregated public movie theaters, segregated side of town. So we didn't grow up speaking Spanish. And it wasn't until I went to Roosevelt, like all young Americans, all I wanted to do was make the varsity football team and get a girlfriend. That was it. Modest goals for life. But I was very fortunate to meet a man named Winston Dobie who worked here. He was a new director of Upward Bound from LA High School. And fortunately, he had been a great track runner. And the one saving grace that I had was that I was on the track team also. And so he let me join Upward Bound. And as I said, I got here as a 15-year-old about 43 years ago. And little would I think that I would be here at this moment. And of course, I went through all the evolutions that our community has gone through, the fierce Chicanismo, right? But I will tell you, as a reporter asked me today, my break with that, which was problematic for me, the intense nationalism, was because I come from a multi-ethnic family. I broke with that thought was when I met Bert Corona, and that intense debate that took place, particularly among students, because as students, we always have intensity, right? Because it's now, when I was leading, working in the labor movement, it was the same thing. We would, my mentor said, sometimes we discover something, we think we invented it, right? And so as students, we had this intensity between, were you for the UFW or were you with CASA? Were you for Chicanos and the farm workers, or were you with the indocumentados, the undocumented? And so we had debates right here across the quad. And representatives from CASA and the UFW came. The UFW had a mistaken policy at the time. It's history, there's no point in denying it, but they were supporting the INS and deporting undocumented workers. I was a young man at the time. My grandfather's undocumented, and that didn't make sense with me. I was like, it didn't make sense. And at the same time, I began to study the class analysis studies that so prevalent in the sociology department. And so that gave me a new perspective of the world and how we had our place there in a kind of international world, a global world. And so my politics evolved from that point, but have never really deviated from that point. I was active in then the anti-Baki movement, which was the court decision that was going to end affirmative action. Very active with that, and the students that were affiliated with CASA, member and the leader in Mecha, and went from there to the People's College of Law, and from there to the labor movement. And I spent 15 years working in the labor movement. First, when immigrants were not organized, I worked with an independent union called the International Brotherhood of General Workers, Local 301, and then moved to the Service Employees International Union, Local 660, where I worked for 12 years, and then subsequent to that with the United Food and Commercial Workers. I say all that to say that that has been my preparation to become a legislator. That the politics have not changed, but the circumstances for which we have opportunities to lead do change. And so my second point is, first, history matters. Second, leaders lead, right? And leadership matters. I know today that Tom Science is with us. He is one of our premier leaders, not just in the area of the law, but the law presents a platform for the demonstration of his leadership. The legislature presents a platform for my team to demonstrate their leadership. This university and the research that's done here out of the center presents a platform for leadership, for research, for intellectual discourse that matters. And so the question of leadership is not a question of title, whether it's given or self-proclaimed, but it's a question of influence in your world for service and social progress. And so that's the question that I think is before everyone. Where are you and what can you do at the service of the people to move our society forward? And so then we have to put all the questions that we grapple with within that framework. And so when I say history matters is that I'm very fortunate because I was one of the few legislators that went to the legislature that came right out of the labor movement and went from being a chief negotiator for SEIU and being part of their national leadership, and part of the leadership of the Los Angeles labor movement, into the legislature. And so what happened is, one of the first things that happened is, it was normal for me. I negotiated over 65 collective bargaining agreements with my signature on them for 40,000 people. We had a strike for 11 days. We saved the healthcare system in 1995. It was a year-long battle, but we got $1 billion to keep the public health system afloat from President Clinton. But all that required negotiations and required compromise. And so today we have a healthcare system in place, and we have a new general hospital that gives the quality of healthcare services that you can get at any place here in Southern California. It's brand new, it's state of the art, it's affiliated with USC. Don't boo everybody. It's affiliated with USC. And it provides quality service. But that's a product of struggle, of negotiations, and of compromise. And those were the experiences, the skill set that I entered the legislature. When I got to the legislature in '98, everybody said, hey, you're bipartisan. I'm like, what does that mean? And I was like, hey, wait a minute, is that a good thing or bad? You know, I want to know, because I'm from Borough Heights. The attitude here, you're bipartisan, hey, really? How about you? So, but those experiences were part of the preparation for my legislative work, was to work with others. And so with respect to how we move forward as a community around these issues related to immigration in particular, those things are very important because they require us to build a broader coalition. Not a coalition of just ourselves. We can't just be in our silo. But it has to be very broad. It has to have a lot of depth, right? And that requires, a lot of exchanges, a lot of engagement. And it's challenging. It's easy to have the discussion amongst people who agree. But I sit next to the founder of the California Minutemen. I sit next to a guy who goes down to the border with a gun. I sit next to a guy who tried to board a plane with an unregistered weapon. That's the discourse that has to be had. Now, I'll be honest here. I don't think there's that much hope for the Tea Party. There's a period of time in our nation where there was a group called the Know-Nothings, and they were against everything, and they didn't want to know anything, and we're going through that period right now. And the Tea Party is the current expression of the Know-Nothings. And it's amazing because they can't hear facts. There's like a new book, there's new literature that says that the brain is set up in a way that they can't hear the truth. So you just, they believe the president's a Muslim, right? He's a Christian. How do you say he's a Muslim, right? He wasn't born here. You're like, what are you talking about? And then he's a Kenyan, and he's anti-colonialist. Some of us wish that was the case, right? You're like, wait a minute. There's no facts that support that. I saw the anti-Obama movie, and it's like his father visited him once when he was 10. And like that one visit overwhelms his whole life experience. And now he's an anti-colonialist Kenyan because his father talked to him and they don't know what his father said to him. Really? Really? That's how persuasive he was on that moment, right? I mean, it's crazy. So the point is that there has to be a dialogue in politics and in leadership because as Tomas will tell you, it matters what your opponents think, right? It really does, because that's who you're trying to engage to move the ball forward, as they say. So you have to, whether you agree with it or not, you have to at least understand it. That's my perspective. You have to at least understand it. And so that's been very, very critical for us in my 15 years, because I have a lot of friends that, most of you in here will probably want to get up and walk out if I say them by name, But you have to do that so that you can move a bill that nonetheless gets 55 votes that will, for the first time in 2 decades, issue licenses to children from the undocumented community, albeit documented, but nonetheless makes that happen, including 3 Republicans. And that will guarantee that. And the point I want to make with that is an important point with respect to the legislation. Guadalupe Gomez, who's here, brought this to my attention because she's the one who came to me and said, look, with respect to this program, people are unwilling to give the transcripts to the undocumented student so that they could apply for the program. And so for us, it was a question of trying to take something that could arguably be a matter of law, arguably be a right, but the question was arguably. And then recognize the historical context that we're in, this fierce anti-immigrant hysteria that takes place all day long, 24/7 on Fox Television, right? On John and Ken, I'm one Bill Gill, right? I got up on the last day and said, now I'm one Bill Gill, right? That takes in that context the need for us to have the full weight of the legislature and the full weight of the governor and the demonstration historically to the world, as we talked today with Senator Durbin, that in California, because of the evolution of the law with Mendez, and Brown, and Plyler, and the negotiated settlement around 187, and then the challenges to those, and then the legal challenges to AB 540, that both as a matter of law through the courts, and then the codification of that through the legislature, that immigrant students today are, for purposes, at least in the field of education, equal to all other students. They can pay the same tuition. They can get private and state scholarships, and they can drive legally without any fear. And that is profoundly, as modest as it may seem, profoundly significant in a country that has deported more people in the recent years than ever. That in a state that borders Arizona, that for us to be in this position is profoundly significant as a model of leadership and as an example of leadership through the nation and through the world. And so thank you. That's why it was important for us to do that. But in that was a discussion and a discourse. When I first introduced the driver's license in 1998, it died in the first committee. And I've been in the legislature 15 years. Only less than a handful of my bills have not gone through the legislative process. Only a handful. There are 100 bills that I've authored that have been signed into law. But only this one died in the first committee. And I was stunned. And all I asked for in the first instance was to reduce the fine. Because when I campaigned for office, this idea was brought to me by 2 people. Nativo Lopez and Bert Corona brought this to my attention and said that members of Hermandad Mexicana were having their cars stolen from them because the license had been taken away in 93, 94. And as I campaigned in Pico Union neighborhoods, people were saying, they're taking our cars from us when we get stopped. And so I went to the Capitol, and I tried to reduce the fine. That was the whole magnitude of the change I wanted to do. A lot of this struggles, sometimes we make perfection the enemy of the good. And sometimes, we don't grab opportunities to make progress when we should. And in all these platforms, in all these areas, in education, in politics and art, culture and art and in law, we always have to grab an opportunity to take an advancement because you don't know when it's going to come again. So in 1998, we rewrote the bill. We played an important role in electing Gray Davis. I was one of 7 legislators to endorse him out of 120. In the whole state, nobody endorsed Gray Davis. I was one of 7. So I was positioned in a relationship with him to have him do something that was important for us. And so there we were working with him, trying to negotiate. But I had to get the bill to his desk. We couldn't get it out of the House the first year. We got out of the House, and then I sat in front of Dick Mountjoy. Dick Mountjoy was the author of Proposition 187. And so when you go to the Senate, and you're a new Assembly member, you sit, the senators sit up there. They're like, kings, they're just sitting up there. You're like, wow, I'm in the Senate. It's red. It's the 2 carpets in the building are red and green, so you're on the red side of the building, and you're like, wow. So you go and sit in front of the senators, and you present your bill. And so I presented my bill, and Dick Mountjoy looked at me like as if I was absolutely crazy. Who would be so audacious to try to change this law? I'm sitting in front of the author of Proposition 187, suggesting that all immigrants should drive in the state of California and have a license and be tested and insured. And it was amazing. He looked at me like, are you absolutely crazy? Should I get you arrested right now? I mean, what's going on here? Did you sneak in? Or, are you really the assembly person? What's happening here? Because it was 3 years had passed, and it just seemed an incredible thought to have. Of course, the bill failed, and we had those challenges and struggles going forward. It is difficult. Social change and social progress is difficult, and it takes time. And when I say history matters, it also means that it's going to take a long time. And so sometimes it happens within your lifetime, you hope. Sometimes it takes, 15 years, Sometimes it takes longer. It doesn't happen just because we think it's a great idea. Right? I remember when you came here, and then became Chicano. Hey, we're Chicanos, all right. I went home to my parents, they're Chicanos. She's like, you don't know anything, shut up. I brought posters home and everything. All of a sudden now, I was like a Mexican, You don't want to be a Mexican, how are you going to be a Chicano? What are you talking about, right? But we have that zeal, we have that enthusiasm, And so I went to the legislature, I had the same zeal and enthusiasm. I'm a new Assembly member. I'm going to change the law. They look at me like, dude. So the bill died. Ultimately, people say I'm stubborn, but I refuse to accept that. So we continue to build a dialogue and a conversation around that, and around some compromises to bring in all the what's called people residing under the color law, which is about 1.2 million people who should arguably, legally, the arguments are there that they should be able to drive legally. But there's a difference between that and executing that. And so we were trying to change the law, be clear and certain. And we were able to put a proposition on the governor's desk. No, we were trying to, but it was defeated because we had division amongst ourselves. It wasn't enough. So we focused on what it should be rather than on what it could be. And so that's a very important point, because some people say, do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? And when we were moving that legislation, it wasn't perfect and it wasn't what everybody wanted. And so our friends, our allies, defeated the first proposal for a driver's license. And it was brutal because the immigrants really didn't care. They were like, no, give us anything. We want to drive, we don't want our cars taken. And so while we had our relationship with the base, right, membership organizations like Hermandad Mexicana, like Voluntarios from San Jose, like Centro Azteca from Fresno, like the groups in Sonoma and Napa, like all these incredible, authentic, organic membership groups of immigrants that are throughout the state, the more traditional organizations said, no, that's not good enough, we're not going to support that. And so the bill died. And then the governor made a commitment and said that he would work with me. I moved the bill again, and guess what happens? This is really important when I tell you, seize opportunity when you get a chance, right? So on September 11th, and September 10th or 9th, we had a meeting with the governor. No, it was September 11th, I think. We had a meeting scheduled with the governor to go figure out setting up the places where we're going to let people come in, because like now, millions of people are going to get licensed. You got to be prepared for them at DMV, the execution of that. So we're all set for that. Well, guess what happens? I think the meeting was maybe September 12th. So guess what happens on September 11th? Right? So here we are trying to do this, and then these terrorists attack the Twin Towers, and it's like, are you kidding me? I mean, people are like shocked, like, are you really gonna try to move that bill? And so this hysteria that was pretty constant, just like, shot up to the sky. And yet we moved the bill, and there were incredible people like Bernie Parks, who was police chief of the LAPD. And he said, Gil, I'm with you. I was with you last week. I'm with you today. I'm with you tomorrow because I believe in it. And it's the right thing to do. And so we moved the bill, and we were prepared to send it down to the governor's desk. And then the governor said, do me a favor, hold on to it. I said, what? He said, if you hold on to it, give me 3 months, we'll move it, we'll make it right, we'll do the whole deal. Just give me that. It's a little stressful right now, it's not a good idea. So here we are, we have to negotiate, right? We've been working for a while. He said, 3 months, 90 days, start a new session. But it's 9/11 and it's crazy and everything's going crazy. I drove down through the street and everybody's looking, because I look, you guys can see how I look. So I drove through the Central Valley because there were no flights. So I had to come back to see my wife. She was in the hospital. I drove through the Central Valley, to see my wife, and everybody's looking at me like, hey, I walk in the 7-Eleven, in the middle of the state, Highway 5, and they're like, hey. I'm like, hey, what's going on here, So in that context, we decided to hold the bill. And the governor promised me that he would sign it. We went through the whole process, a lot of intensity, a lot of anger, a lot of people upset. We get to it at the end, and he vetoes my bill. I don't know if you guys remember this. In the fall of 2002. So he vetoed my bill. Well, my wife had passed away that summer. And so it was really brutal. It was harsh. And so one of the things about when your emotions overwhelm you, your judgment gets impaired. And so he vetoed my bill. So then I, downtown with all the cameras and stuff, said, I'm not going to endorse it. And I'm like, wait, you're a downtown Democrat. What do you mean you're not going to endorse him? How could that be? And I said, no. He made a promise not to me. I got a license. He made a promise to the whole community. And now he reneged. I'm not going to endorse him. And so in 2002, I stood up and said, I'm not endorsing the Democratic nominee for governor. Well, that was not a real popular thing amongst Democrats. And then we had it had to be unanimous in the Latino caucus, in the legislative caucus, and so I called the caucus and said, hey, I'm pulling my support for the governor. They're like, well, wait, you can't do that. I said, no, I'm doing it. No, wait. Trust me, there's the pariah period followed from there. And so then I went forward and withdrew it, and so then the Latino caucus didn't endorse him. Then we got the Latinos of the Los Angeles School Board, and then MAPA, and so we created a little pushback on the governor. The governor won, and he won. There was great division. There's a lot of acrimony. People were not happy. The Latino vote dropped off significantly, and it created this incredible tension and stress between myself and the unions, and the Democratic Party, and Democrats, and a whole bunch of people who were upset. It showed a vulnerability with the governor. Other people seized upon it, other Democrats, and then the governor got recalled. And so in a desperate effort, he signed anything we put in front of him, which was probably more liked by the left, but more vulnerable in the mainstream, and we got clobbered. And it was part of his recall. And then he got recalled. And then he got recalled. My God, that was, I mean, it was like, talk about hating going on in society. Things were crazy. And so then we worked with Governor Schwarzenegger, gets elected. I mean, you know, California, we vote for a celebrity. Give me a break. Now today, everybody understands what a disaster that was. But back then, everybody thought it was great. And so everybody, hey, Arnold. So in a meeting with myself, the Justice for Janitors, SCIU, HERE, Dolores Huerta, with Chirla, Cadesen, Sol, everybody says, you know what? You should go negotiate with the governor. Because they're going to repeal that bill. There's this signatures are being gathered, and it's going to be a disaster. Remember, if signatures get gathered and it gets repealed through the electorate, you need a 2/3 majority to get it back on, and you need 2/3 of the public to go for it. It's not going to happen. And we're very fortunate. Some friends of ours shared some polling, and it would have been disastrous. So we took the bill back, and the governor said, we're going to put some amendments, and it's going to be fine. And so the governor agreed to it. Now we've learned 10 years later that he was untrustworthy, both in all matters personal and public. I'm not saying anything that's out of school here. And he reneged. And so what happened is, from that veto of the 2 years earlier where we would have had a bill that was acceptable, we go 10 years, right? And so it goes back to, you have to understand the assessment of where you are politically and where the society is in terms of how you move forward. Your messaging, your imaging, you know, the images of our community. If you listen to John and Ken or Fox or Lou Dobbs or all these other people, I mean, it was just like constantly just hate. Pete Wilson's campaign on 187, just constantly hate. And that becomes, the perceptions become, to some extent, some part of a reality that people take in. And then you couple that with a bad economy, that's like the last thing you want to do is say you want to give somebody else another right. Because that's the only thing that saves people, right? They feel better, like, well, at least I'm not a Mexican, you know, because then I couldn't drive, right? That's like the one little benefit they have in society. So they're not going to give that up, right? And so you have to have an assessment of where we're at politically. It's very sober, very real, very concrete assessment of where we're at politically. Not so much what we want. Our values and our vision never change. But how we get there in a very concrete and a very real way is what matters. And that's where we're at today. We have made tremendous progress in the state. We're very fortunate. We have liberal leadership. We have a lot of activity. I mean, I'm so happy to see so many levels of leadership of our society. People are strongly advocating for integration and moving immigrants into the mainstream, both for today but also for the future, because the demographics are people are leaving the workforce, and we need, one thing is that we really do need this immigrant workforce at every level. But it's important to know that, and it's important to know that's not the way the rest of the world sees us. When you look at Arizona, and you look in the federal government, the distinction between the two is that they're so dominated by the far right now. And you have people who, while I was critical of the president for not moving on this initially at the very beginning, although many of my friends said slow down, but once the Tea Party came in, impossible. There are people who got elected who said, our goal is to make this president a one-term president. How do you start a conversation with them? How do you make an agreement with them when their only thing they want to talk about is you leaving the White House? And that's the challenges that exist in Washington. But those are challenges that exist in Washington, but that Washington is the aggregate of representatives throughout the country. And so for us, as Latinos continue to grow, change of demographics, the birth rates, our need today, if you ask me, is to move those who can become citizens towards citizenship, to move those who can register to vote, to register, and to move those who can vote to vote. To take advantage of that political space individually and as a collective, as a community, to take advantage of those democratic openings and opportunities to move us forward. Because then if we can dictate, right? I know there's a campaign against the sheriff in Arizona. There's opportunity for a U.S. Senator. If you can make those types of changes at that little local level, but can have this impact at the aggregate level in Washington, then you have the prospects for change. Clearly today, if you ask me, we have to re-elect the president. Whatever criticisms we may have, whatever perspectives looking backward, there's only one choice for us going forward, and that is to do all that we can to elect the president. It's the only way that we have an opportunity and a shot at the DREAM Act. It's the only way that we have an opportunity at comprehensive immigration reform, which is really the solution. It's the only way that we have an opportunity to continue the American experience, which is uniquely an immigrant experience, the only place in the world where people come to live here to make this their country. We are, as people say, we are not the problem, as I've said. We are the solution and we are the future. But we should recognize that with that comes extraordinary responsibilities and obligations. Leadership requires us to have the highest moral and ethical standards. Leadership requires us to understand that there are people who have differences with us and to figure out how to have them join us in our project to move our society forward. I thank you. As I said, I'm very flattered to be here with you this afternoon. Really, really, on my personal behalf, on behalf of my wife, we're here. She would have been so excited, and on my family, I'm truly flattered to spend this afternoon with you. Thank you so much.